At launch, the recordings ended on the last call. However, there have been at least a few people who've listened to them all, so I'm adding more. There's dozens of hours of developer commentary now, so I really wouldn't try getting through them all. They're just here for when you need some background audio in real time or observation. In FNAF 1, if an animatronic enters your office while you're in cans, you'll hear them wheezing. In this game, those wheezes happen instead when an animatronic tries to move but fails. FNAF fans are so used to that sound meaning death, so putting it in another context is initially unsettling. But you get used to hearing the groans and become conditioned to ignore it over time, which would have led to a great moment when you realize that these groans are louder and happening regardless of what camera you're on. Yeah, Bonnie and Chica were initially supposed to also make the groaning when they've entered your office, just like FNAF 1. Ultimately, I decided not to do this because it makes it less clear why you died, and it's already pretty challenging to learn how to deal with each animatronic. When redesigning the mechanics, I wanted to hone in on making the player panic and punishing any signs of panic. It's always a bit amusing watching people frantically searching cans for anomalies and threats, checking lights every other second, when all they have to do is breathe and take stock of the situation. FNAF 1 tries to teach you that sometimes doing nothing is the best course of action, so I wanted a similar lesson in this game. However, the best FNAF 1 strategy bypasses the lesson entirely, so I really wanted to make sure I avoided that pitfall in this game. When I sent out the game to early access, nights 1 to 3 started at 3, 2, and 1 a.m. respectively. I wanted to get the player into the action right away, but it ended up just confusing the playtesters. Besides, those dull hours are important for memorizing how the pizzeria should look. When the phone guy says, "Hey, sorry for the weird schedule," in night 2, it was actually supposed to refer to the varying start times, so now it applies to the jumps in dates between shifts. Foxy is the only animatronic I didn't have a clear plan for when starting the project. I initially wanted him to be similar to FNAF 4, where he comes out of his cove but goes back in when you stare at him. When I considered the animation work required, I changed it to what you see in the final game. However, you needed to look at Foxy for much longer to calm him, about 3 seconds. But without clear visual feedback on how long you needed to look at him, it felt too frustrating. So now he resets basically as soon as the cam transition disappears. The animatronics were supposed to have animations when the lights were shined on them. In the near hall, they were supposed to slightly step before stopping, sort of like red light, green light. Bonnie's near door position is a great example of what I mean. Similarly, they would reach towards you once they got to the doorway. I even made an animation for Bonnie, but decided it looked too jarring when the rest of the game was so stationary. Maybe one day I'll go back and add idle animations for each can, that way this idea would work better. For piecing together the story, I knew I wanted some clues from the main series to be used here as well. As a general rule of thumb, if evidence from the main series isn't being contradicted by something in this game, it's fair game to use for understanding the story. Also, to narrow the scope, no Remnant. Or sci-fi. The script for that last call has actually always been the blurred text in the newspaper at the start of the game. I've had most of these additional calls written up for a while, but I honestly didn't expect people to get through more than the first few, so I didn't think it was worthwhile to record the rest. When I look back, I do regret how this game launched. I created the Game Jolt page on a whim only a couple weeks away from release, not realizing how important the first day or two is for making your page successful. As of recording, the game is at 325 followers, after being played by pretty massive influence. A far cry from fan games of similar coverage and scope, though I'm sure it also has to do with the weaker visual style and demanding hardware requirements. But honestly, the meek launch was helpful in a way. The game was unpolished. It didn't even have View Pizzeria until a few days later. I shudder to think that people completed the game without ever station or get stuck. The tips were entirely randomized at launch, but now there are dozens of checks for specific events and mistakes, so that the death tips can be more helpful. For example, a lot of people would have multiple Foxy charges every night, but because they never died to him, they'd never see tips on how to keep him in the cove. So now, the game checks if he's done any charges, and may give you a Foxy death tip even if he wasn't the direct cause of your death. Of course, in about a third of the playthroughs I watch, the tips are ignored entirely. But hey, I tried. Looking back at those older playthroughs makes me frustrated and disappointed, because these players could have had a better experience had I thought ahead more carefully. It's the same reason I like to update frequently. I hate to think that someone stops playing or enjoys the game less because of an issue that could have been fixed had I updated a bit faster. For anyone interested in the harder nights, look on the Game Drill page for the link to the guide. It's got info on just about everything you could want to know, and you can always request something be added if it's not already in. My favorite playthroughs to watch are the ones with two people, one watching for anomalies and the other handling the animatronics. That's actually how my partner and I play through the game. We've beaten a lot of games like that, one giving advice as the other plays. I beat Ultimate Custom Night 4020 with her controlling the music box and heater, which was my first max mode experience. It warms my heart to think that this game provided that to others. Freddy is actually my favorite threat in the game. He's entirely different from FNAF 1, and I think he's more engaging. However, he's changed a lot since release, and I'm almost embarrassed at how cheap he used to be. On launch, he could hide his laugh when moving to Dining Room and Cove, which just didn't make sense spatially, since you should see him sprinting down the nearest hall camp. I rationalized it as Schrodinger's Hall. Whichever hall you aren't looking at is the one Freddy stealth sprints down to reach the office. Thankfully, Freddy still couldn't hit and laugh when moving from stage, backstage, kitchen, and bathroom, so this situation was rare and didn't impact game balance much at all. My biggest blunder with Freddy on launch was that he could approach your door while laughing. I thought, surely it's obvious that he's a threat when he's at your door looking in. And I was right, it did make him more interesting in high-level gameplay. But it committed a design crime. It muddies the danger signals to new players' learning. Players couldn't make the silence equals danger, laughter equals safe connection as easily, especially if their first encounter with Freddy happened at the door. In the end, I've landed on a Freddy that I think is perfect. He's the clear threat of the main four mascots, his signature laugh is a key part of his mechanic, he's explained succinctly in the Night 3 call, and he's dynamic. And for players that find him too challenging, the Glowing Freddy modifier tones down his difficulty while still keeping him interesting. There's actually a charity version of the game I made for the 2024 FNAFmas stream exclusively. The animatronics all got holiday design, and I added over 50 holiday and YouTuber anomalies, but only about half of them appeared on stream. Some of my favorites have essentially become lost media without anyone even knowing. Poor Snowman. You've listened to a lot of these, which probably means you've been skipping the Mr. Hippo speeches, but Mr. Hippo has some genuinely good bits, and I feel like people bail out of his calls too early. You can skip Candy Cadet though. I really shouldn't have added those.
The final update for the game will be the biggest by far, essentially being a sequel-sized DLC. Endless Night and Custom Night will be fun additions, but the meat of the update will be coming from the New Game Plus, aka the Investigation. You're a paranormal investigator looking into a freshly abandoned pizzeria, mostly being used as storage as the company transitions to their new and improved location. Your job is to fill out 5 sea dolls for the corporation, monitoring anomalous activity and paranormal events each night. The Investigation will be starring 3 new threats: Prototype Toy Freddy, Prototype Balloon Boy, and the marionette.
Wow, you've gotten through a lot of recording. I think this means you're doing real-time night? Why else would you be going through so many calls? Well, if that's the case, I wish you luck. Some tips on staying sane. Don't refresh the coolest anomalies. Keep them around to look at. Collect them when Golden Freddy is less active. It's like a little mini-game that you can use to keep your brain active. And while you're at it, rank all of the anomalies in a tier list. You're going to have a lot of time. You'll probably see every anomaly several times. The first 30 minutes are the worst because barely anything happens. It kind of breaks your spirit. But power through to 1 a.m. and the night starts getting real. Don't trust the calm before the storm past 5:30. I kind of thought that whole dozens of hours of dev commentary bit would scare off any potential completionists. How do I break this to you? Well, dozens of hours was a slight exaggeration. For the sake of this game's file size, I can't justify adding more recordings. But if you just want more developer insights, check under the stage for a QR code. It'll bring you to a document with all sorts of developer content. The design document, the original notes I scribbled about improving FNAF 1, mechanics for the last big future update, all types of info. I'll be adding more over time, too. But regardless of whether you're interested in any of that, I'm sure you've gathered at this point that this game means a lot. It'll be a while before I can make the final update, and it pains me to leave the game in an unfinished state. But for players like you, I will come back and finish the game eventually. Thanks for listening, and thank you for playing. You got a secret developer document and a heartfelt thank you, and you still want more? Kind of ruins the sentiment, don't you think? I'm not some endless fountain of insightful commentary, you know. I don't know what you're wanting here. Go play Stanley Parable or Slay the Princess for a meta-narrative. These phone calls are far too niche to justify writing a decent one here myself. Listen to a podcast if you want some background noise. I've got nothing left for you. Maybe you got through everything I added to the document? Are you just looking for more developer insights? Well, it won't have the phone filter noise, but I've made about a dozen or so hours of real-time night VODs. Plenty of info in those that I haven't mentioned elsewhere, if you're willing to wade through the babbling about nothing in particular. But that's it. That's all there is. I swear this time. Alright, well, this is just greedy. You've ruined a good thing here, so I'm spoiling the sequel for you. Is that what you want? Fine. Surely you found Springtrap rotting away in the pizzeria. You know that Golden Freddy plushie in his hand? Well, in observation at Freddy's grand reopening, if you're continually negligent towards Evan during the home sections, Springtrap will use it. Alright, you want a meta commentary? Here's a developer insight about the developer insights. I strongly considered causing an auto jump scare at the end of that last message, but I just couldn't sit with the idea of someone being moments away from beating a tough challenge and then dying from the phone call. Plus, I don't want to code that. I only had the bare minimum content required to my games.
Some foreshadowing of events I have planned for the third game, though that's far, far in the future. That being said, this game still stands as its own contained story. I think it makes putting the pieces together more satisfying when you know there is a way to make it work,